Oh, no, we're good.
10 seconds.
I just want to answer you.
I went out in the hall and tried to bring them in, but
Okay.
yeah, because we're going to be late if we don't.
We're going to be late, so we're going to start just in a few seconds. Please take a seat. Dr. Vijay, please take a seat. Come on in, please. Very good. Okay, we have a very distinguished panel. The second panel of the morning is on activism to abolish war. And we're going to start with Dr. John Reuwer. Sorry if my pronunciation is not good. And John was a physician for many years. He was in emergency rooms, and he is a member of World Beyond War Board of Directors. Nowadays, he is an adjunct professor of Peace and Justice Studies at St. Michael's College in Vermont. So he teaches courses on conflict resolution, and both nonviolent activism and nonviolent communication. In the past panel, we heard about full spectrum domination, and John's presentation is on full spectrum activism.
Thank you, Foad. So I've been involved in lots of different kinds of activism, and I'm going to do a very brief presentation of how I see that in the full spectrum of what needs to be accomplished if we are to eliminate war as an instrument of politics. So I moved to Vermont years ago, partly because it was supposed to be such a progressive state. And the anti-militarism battle that we have fought there for the last 8 years has been against the basing of these F-35 dual-capable fighter bombers being based at our little commercial airport in the middle of our beautiful natural state. You'd think this would be an easy battle where we are. This plane is extremely noisy, 4 times noisier than the F-16 the National Guard uses now. It has a high crash risk because it only has 1/5 the hours that the F-16 had before they based it at a civilian airport. It's untested how much that will crash. It's a nuclear-capable bomber, which makes us a nuclear target that we thought we got rid of decades ago. And it just has no place being in a civilian airport. We also have some of those liberal politics in the country, including 2 senators that usually vote the right way on lots of issues, except when it comes to militarism. So Bernie Sanders is one of those, and he has fought us tooth and nail to make sure this fighter bomber lands in this state.
Really good.
So we have done creative things along. You can see this postcard we made of Welcome to Vermont. We photoshopped in all the 20 F-35s they're going to bring in and say, cover your ears when you come to our state. We have done absolutely everything from town meetings to ballot referendums where the people voted against it, to demonstrations, to culminating a few weeks ago with Air Force veterans being arrested in the offices of Patrick Leahy just to get them to listen, all to no avail. And so just this last week, the F-35s finally bedded down. The first 2 came, and we have been stymied by a triple threat of the politicians in lockstep for having this thing, the media that silences us, and the local real estate developers who, for some reason, support all this with constant ads in the paper. So the coverage on the front page is they get a warm welcome in Vermont, and they're greeted by crowds. You can see the crowds on the top of the airport parking garage there. There were 11 of them. Meanwhile, there were 15 of us in an airport committee meeting, the guys that run the airport, asking them what they're going to do to protect us citizens against these bombers from the National Guard. And that got one little line in this article that says, we're bringing a warm welcome. So that's the mainstream media that's in cahoots and that we couldn't break. So given that we can't win these little battles easily, I mean, they're long-term struggles, we will win eventually. This plane will crash itself out of existence. So I wanted to show you World Beyond Wars. If you don't have the alternative global security system, make sure you leave here with a copy of that, because it really outlines everything that this very bright group of people has put together to say, these are things that have to be addressed if we're going to replace war with something better. And as they mentioned earlier, there's 3 phases to this: demilitarizing security, managing conflict without violence, and creating a culture of peace. So very briefly, I want to go some of the things that I do here. So I starred the areas that I've been involved in recently. If you look at the stars up near religious peacemaking and peace education. So I think the most rewarding thing for me is having 20 undergraduate students for 24 classes, 90 minutes each, where I get to talk about all the alternatives to war and how powerful that is. And it's they get it. Almost all of them get it. I've had a number of them say it's really changed their thinking on whether they want to go into the military and so forth. If you can't actually get paid to do this, which I feel very fortunate to be doing, you can help out World Beyond War with our own online courses to make this available to people, and there are people all over the world that take these things. The goal being universal peace literacy. Meanwhile, being a Catholic, we heard from John yesterday about how a hierarchical church structure and a hierarchical military structure work in tandem to convince people that obeying authority is the most important thing to do in life. I have a brother who just sent one of his sons into the priesthood and the other 3 into the military, and it really exemplifies that. We have great family conversations. But there is a crack in this edifice every now and then, and right now Pope Francis, actually in his World Peace Day message in 2017, said it's time that human beings, and Catholics in particular, develop a life of nonviolence, including action for politics. And if you're like me, most Catholics I know, when you use the word nonviolence, are like a deer in the headlights. So my partner and I spent a lot of time giving workshops, teaching Catholics and other Christians about what that means from both a theological point of view and a practical point of view. And it's a lot of fun. But it's into conservative areas you might not make otherwise. Oh, somebody's got to push the button and stop doing it. Oh, there it is. It's slow. Okay. Yeah. So, moving on to other areas, there's a line in there about the civilian-based defense, and more in particular, civilian unarmed peacekeeping. So the primary group in the world doing that right now is the Nonviolent Peace Force. They have projects in 4 places and about 250 people. The idea of training civilians to go into areas of violent conflict where weapons are everywhere and training other civilians how to protect themselves. And I spent 4 months in South Sudan doing this recently to learn how that model works, and it really is beautiful. And it gives young people the excitement, the ones who don't want to just demonstrate but really want to deal with the question that keeps everybody behind militarism, that is, what do you do about the bad guys? So the people that really want to approach the bad guys face to face, rifle butt to face, you can literally do this with the Nonviolent Peace Force. And so having that option is terrific. So in South Sudan, the upper pictures here show the kind of workshops we give where we train people to be proactive. Don't wait for the bad guys with guns to come to you. Go to them first and see what their needs are and see if you can negotiate something. Learn how to hide when you need to hide, to stand up when you need to stand up, where to go for safety, who your allies are, and what you can do to stay safe proactively rather than run in fear. But the most amazing thing about being there was seeing the local peacemakers already doing a lot of this stuff, and they don't really know that they're doing it yet. They don't know where it fits into this big picture. And we can learn so much from them. So on the lower left is the Interfaith Council for Peace Initiatives, who I'll show you a video when we finish, are sending a welcoming message to our conference here from South Sudan. Unbelievable guys. These are guys who go into the bush where everybody is afraid to go because all the armed actors who, when they're not fighting, have to rob people to get all the needs met and take them in and everything. And they go fearlessly everywhere. And they're a really big part of why there's some peace now in South Sudan. And on the right side is a community policing group. And this couple who are on either side of me, this is a really dirt poor village, they patrol their area where most people have AK-47s unarmed to try to keep the peace and break up fights and so forth. And I was privileged to hear an argument between the man of that family and his dad, who thought they were crazy for going out there without weapons. So that constant, can you do something without weapons, is literally being explored and lived out there, and in many other places around the world. But the real message from South Sudan was the first place I've been where, when we, privileged people, talk about endless war, it's kind of a theoretical concept, it's a profit center for weapons manufacturers, and a point of argument in politics. For the South Sudanese, who've been at war more often than not for the past 63 years, endless wars, really the face of war. So this is a picture of Bentu, a capital in the city in the northern part just below Sudan, where literally the entire village, all you see left is the grid of the streets that were there. Every tugul, every house was demolished, and all the people from there and for dozens of miles around now live in UN protection camps. As you drive through there, you see nothing but the devastation of war. And they took me out to the front lines and showed me the houses with the bullet wounds and the cartridges on the ground. And you talk to these people, what they went through. Almost no one in South Sudan, when you talk to them, doesn't have a story or can show you their personal bullet wound, can tell you how their husband was killed, how their wife was raped, or how their children were abducted by the army or by the rebel groups. These people know the face of war, and they can really help us, I think. And so I was working with the Nonviolent Peace Force. I really brought the message of World Beyond War. Nobody's ever told them they won't want to end their war in South Sudan, but how they lit up when I say, no, we want to end war everywhere. It was a totally new concept to them, and they loved it. And it would be very easy to start chapters there. They would need some material help. But I left a few shirts. There's somebody here that I met who works for the UN, Anne Marie in the back, who actually was there working with UN, and we met. She's going to take some more World Beyond War materials back to our friends there. And this is at Interfaith Council, and I want to play now a message for them. But before I do that video, let me just show you one more thing, because I think we have enough time to do it. One more. Okay, so people talk about, the symbolism is so important. We know the profiteers are against this, the mainstream media supports them, and politicians who cannot make a case for themselves doing good things sell fear, which sells war. But there's also that sexy factor, right? I mean, this is an F-35 picture that I took long before I even knew what an F-35 was, and it's just it's a sexy symbol. It's really appealing. To have something that looks like this actually be sold as that's what keeps you safe from all evil is a really powerful message. And since I've been in this business, I've been trying to come up with an alternative, and clearly we're not there yet. So we need to hold a contest. Somebody needs to come up with some artwork that does for the peace movement what this does for the war. So let's have a message from my friend Lutheran pastor in Yambio, West Equatoria, South Sudan, who sent us a message today.
Dear brothers and sisters, members of WBW,
Roosters are the bane of the third world in my life.
you can't sleep. The people who are badly affected by the war, which is raging all over the world. To introduce myself, I'm the Reverend Nineham Jacob PC. I'm the Secretary General of the Interfaith Council of Peace, and we are now in the orphanage center of the migratory villages of South Sudan and Sudan. These kids here, you are seeing, these kids are orphans. They lost their fathers, they lost their mothers, they lost all their parents. And the church, through interfaith, many people to go and bring them to this center where they're being taken care of. This video has a message to pass to the world, and this message will be passed through the song that we are going to see now in this video. We are appealing to the world. We are appealing to all those who are having this need for war to stop war. War is killing our children. War is killing our country. War is killing our women. War is killing the nation, the development, and what remains is life. So as you listen to this song, don't look at how the dark leaders, but listen to the message they are passing to the world through World Beyond War. My appeal to all those in authority, to everybody, organizations, is to join World Beyond War so that we work together to end all the wars in the world. Thank you very much. I have not much to say, but you will watch through the video that I have recorded and represented to you. God bless you. Pass our regards from Western Equatoria, from Yambio, and from the evangelical churches in South Sudan, and especially from the orphanage. To all those who are members of this conference, we are looking forward for your support, for working with you together for peace and development. Pass my regards to John, who introduced me to World Beyond War, and all the members of World Beyond War who are now in the conference. God bless you. Thank you very much.
Okay. They did a song for us. We don't have time. Anybody who wants to see it later, I'd be happy to show it.
Oh, that's so fair.
Well, let's finish that and then we can do it.
Thank you, John. Wonderful presentation. Pat on his index card, like previous panel sessions. You can have your questions on it. If you want, you can put your name towards the end of the card, and if you're addressing the question to one of the panelists specifically, please put his or her name on the card so we know who's supposed to answer it. Our next distinguished speaker is Kristine Karch. She is a German feminist, a peace and environmental activist working nationally and internationally on gender and environmental justice, on women and militarization and environment. And she's going to talk about the international network, No War, No to NATO, No to War, No to NATO, and the campaign to stop the US airbase Ramstein in Germany. Kristine.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to this conference to World Beyond War. NATO is an increasing obstacle to achieving world peace. Since the end of the Cold War, NATO has reinvented itself as a tool for military action by the international community, including promoting on the so-called war on terror. In the reality, it is the vehicle for US-led use of force with military bases in all countries. By passing the United Nations and the system of international law, accelerating militarization and escalating arms expenditure, NATO countries account for 75% of global military expenditure. Pursuing this expansionist agenda since 1991, designed to advance strategic and resources interests, NATO has waged war in the Balkans under the guise of so-called humanitarian war, and was waged 7 years of brutal war in Afghanistan, where the tragic situation is escalating and the war has expanded into Pakistan. This is quoted from the founding statement of our network, No to War, No to NATO, in October 2008 to prepare the action against the 60th anniversary NATO summit in Strasbourg, Kiel. And it is actual that in former times, and the situation is getting more worse. The war in Afghanistan is still ongoing. This means 17 years now. And we have new wars in Libya, Syria, Yemen, and we have the huge threat against Iran, and not only against the Iran. We also have threats in Latin America, like the Venezuela, and also the situation in Colombia. Our network is acting for delegitimation NATO since this time, and we were present on all NATO summits afterward. It was 2010 in Lisbon. We were 2012 in Chicago. We have been at the actions in Wales. We also was in Warsaw 2016 and in Brussels 2017 and 2018. We normally make a counter summit 1 or 2 days. It depends on the situation. We have demonstrations against NATO, and very often we had peace camp additional and actions of civil disobedience. And now we are preparing the next actions against the NATO summit, next NATO summit, coming in December this year in London, where they celebrate the 70th anniversary of NATO, additional to the small summit taking place this year in Washington in April, at the exact birthday of NATO, where we was also present, and together with World Beyond War and others we make actions in Washington. And now we are preparing our activities in London, and outside there you can find this leaflet where it is described more what we are doing and preparing there. The situation of this summit is, I think, a little bit specific. It's the first NATO summit after the break of the ENF treaty, and this summit will found as answer to this challenge of the loss of the ENF treaty in a situation where Trump is doing politic America first and is raising the military budget, and of course doing a new race. And we have to avoid to get new nuclear weapons to Germany, and to avoid that we get the situation like in the mid-18s, where we kicked out successfully media-range nuclear weapons with these ENF treaties, that they will not come back, and therefore it's very important to act against these nuclear weapons, because they are also a danger, not only because in general militarization is damaging the environment or a military installation, but also they are the goal of the weapons of the enemies, and therefore all places would be really affected by a war, and therefore we have to avoid it, because we are the first who are facing this escalation if we will really get a situation of war in Europe, and it's not the United States. This is one point. The next point is that NATO is increasing the confrontation to Russia. They are stationed more and more troops around the Russian border. They're including the Nordic states like Sweden and Finland to their strategy. There are a lot of exercises also in the Baltic region around the border of Russia. They strengthen their presence in the Black Sea, and the expansion of NATO is not only in the Eastern Europe. They are discussing about NATO membership with Georgia and also Ukraine, and as 13 member North Macedonia will come into NATO. Probably it will have finished all the assignments until the NATO summit in London, and they can celebrate it at least next year. Also, NATO goes to Latin America. Colombia is a partner of global NATO, and also Trump promised Bolsonaro in Brasilia that he is the best cooperation partner outside NATO to NATO, and they have common military exercises in Latin America. And actually, NATO has renewed the cooperation treaty with Australia and New Zealand, and all these to close the fence around the Russian border with military installation and possibilities to use military installations there. And the other point which is very important to this summit is the EU militarization. And as you know, we have discussed here also EU militarization and PESCO, and with the new president of the EU Commission, the German former war minister Ursula von der Leyen, the EU goes to more militarization and goes closer to NATO. And if you see who she presented for the new EU Commission, that it's all making war, increase the budget for the military industries and these things, and that have nothing to do with a peaceful evaluation of the European Union. And the last point I will mention is that, of course, all these war around the world and crisis situation in Libya, Syria, and Yemen causes a lot of refugees who try to come to Europe to find a place where they can survive, because in their countries which are suffered by war or also by climate crisis. Please remember, one of the reasons of the civil war in Syria was the dry of Syria, and they couldn't produce any more food, and this got to conflicts, and now we have this situation and they are fleeing. But the answer of NATO and also the European Union is to close the border of the European Union, to put the military in the Mediterranean Sea, but not to save the lives of the refugees, but to pull them back to their origin countries. And in this situation, they are dealing with countries with dictator and reactionary leaders to get them out of the European Union. And this we will discuss on a counter summit called the New World Order, which takes place in London on November 13th, with a lot of international speakers, We will discuss it in plenary session and also in workshops. Our workshops are addressing the topics conflict and climate change, NATO, Russia and the new Cold War and High North, militarization, racism, migration and Islamophobia, the need of nuclear disarmament, oil war and the Middle East, including the Iran, NATO goes global, the rise of far right, and 22nd century war, oh, I forgot our new title, yes, we decided yesterday. So here's the old one, Tesh and New Arms Trade, but we have a more polite formulation for this. And of course we have a workshop about the EU militarization. And the final plenary, we will discuss strategy and alternatives. And these are, for us, we need a situation for common security. As alternative, we need a situation of cooperation between partners and different countries. We need respect for each other. And of course, we have to disarm also military and use this budget for social and ecological issues to solve all these problems. And of course, I forgot to mention, we are acting against the 2% goal of the GDP, which also will play a key role on this summit, because Trump is always asking for more money from the European NATO members, because he's not willing to do this alone. And additional in London on the Sunday, the 1st December, we will have the annual meeting of our network, and on the 3rd of December, this is the day of the official NATO summit starting. We will have a big demonstration, and I think to the demonstration Chris will say something. And I will come to at the end, but I have shortly to tell you something about one activity besides others the network also support. It's a protest on the campaign against the US airbase in Ramstein. It's an airbase where the drones war is going through because of the relay station of this airbase. All the signals from the drone pilots coming from the United States are routed to the drones itself, and they are going to find the goals in the Middle East. And as you know, drones are mostly killing civilians and not militaries. And this airbase is also a threat to the environment, because the pollution, Pat told us about all these fire foam problems we have, and they're additional. We can't use groundwater under the airbase, it's completely polluted, and the noises are awful around this airbase. And since 5 years we have a week of action in the summer time against this airbase, with a peace camp, with blockades, with seminars and workshops, demonstrations and human change. And we ask, of course, from our government to close the airbase, to shut down the relay station, and to ban the US for using this space for their drone wars, and ask the government cancels comprehensive cancels the Convention of the Presence of Foreign Forces in the Federal Republic to kick them out, including all other installations like EUCOM and AFRICAM. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristine. Our last very distinguished speaker is Chris Nineham. Chris is a founding member of the Stop the War Coalition. He's also a coordinator of the WSF Assembly of Social Movements. Chris writes for the Stop the War and Counterfire and other outlets and appears regularly in the media. He's going to talk to us about the crisis in the UK and the anti-war movement. Chris.
Thanks to the organisers. It's good to be here. I want to, as Foad says, I want to say a few words about the situation in the UK because partly, it's what I'm involved in mainly, but also because I think it illustrates the extent to which we clearly live in a very, very dangerous world at the moment, much more dangerous than at any time. I think we can talk about maybe since the sort of height of the Cold War crisis in the early 60s. But also it's a situation in which I think there are real openings and possibilities in various places and in various times that we should be able to, or that we need to think about seizing in the struggle against war and imperialism. And the situation in Britain is one, as you probably got some idea, of really deep political and constitutional crisis. Parliamentary politics is completely paralysed, partly over the question of Brexit. It actually goes deeper than that. There is, at the same time, a real rage in society, in British society, against the political elites and the elites more widely. And just to give you one kind of a sense of the depth of the situation, I think we're in a period in which the breakup of the United Kingdom is very, very likely. Yesterday there was a demonstration in Edinburgh calling for independence for Scotland of 200,000 people, which is one of the biggest, it's one of the biggest demonstrations we've ever seen in Scotland, and it's just like taking things to a completely different level. And there is, clearly the Brexit situation has opened up the possibility, at least a discussion about the possibility of United Ireland as well. So we're in a very, very deeply crisis-ridden situation in Britain, and I think it's worth saying that one of the components of that, one of the things that's driving that crisis has been the legacy or the ongoing situation of Britain's close ties to the US and the kind of wars that it's been pursuing. The Iraq War was a major kind of staging post towards the kind of crisis that we're in now politically, in the sense that not just there were massive demonstrations, there was a big movement against it, but also a deep sense that the political elites lied to the people, manipulated evidence, pursued a war that was not didn't have popular support, that Parliament went along with it. That was definitely one of the moments at which the kind of political fabric in Britain started to be torn up. So we have a situation now where the current government is pursuing a type of Brexit, a kind of Brexit that would inevitably make Britain even closer than it already is to the US. It would tie Britain's foreign policy much more to the Trump project. You can see that already. Britain is probably the major non-Middle East country in the world that is edging towards the US position on Iran. Boris Johnson has said, has endorsed the idea that the recent attacks on Saudi Arabia were conducted by the Iranians. It's really the only major country to do that. It's kind of broken with the rest of the with the bulk of European countries who are tentatively and ineffectively, it has to be said, but nevertheless, in some sort of opposition to what Trump is trying to do over Iran. That will, if Britain does leave the EU on a kind of Boris Johnson ticket, that process will intensify massively. And so, in that sense, the role of the anti-war movement in Britain, I think, is very, very important. The other side of the picture, that's gloomy and frightening, the other side of the picture is that we do have and have had now for 20 years, and you know it goes back beyond that, but specifically over the last sort of period of war and terror, a very, very strong anti-war movement that has made a big impact on British society with the big demonstrations over Iraq, and then subsequently demonstrations over the Israeli attack on Lebanon in 2006, over Afghanistan, over Syria, Libya, and so on. There's a big kind of political movement in Britain that is opposed to these wars. It's not always easy to keep it organised and keep it kind of functioning and sort of dynamic, but nevertheless it has a real weight within the sort of political scene in Britain. And this is one of the factors that's led to the situation where we have while we have a government that is deeply committed to NATO, the special relationship, continued support for American wars, we have a population that is very, very strongly opposed. Very, very strongly opposed. You know, you look at the opinion polls, 60, 70% of the population definitely against these foreign wars of intervention, and so on and so forth. Now this is, you know, you think about it, this is quite a historical situation really. This is quite a kind of an important shift in the situation in Britain. Britain is obviously has a terrible colonial past. It presided over the biggest empire in probably world history, etc. Until very, very recently, you know. And yet you have now a situation where in this country that remains at the heart of the Western imperial project, the vast majority of the population is completely opposed to it. So this seems to me to be a matter of some importance, and it's of course been both those things, the movement and the public opinion, have translated into a situation where for the first time in British history we have a leader of the Labour Party who is genuinely, in principle, anti-war, anti-intervention, pro-Palestine, etc. And you know, people I've just had a question on a card saying, you know, it's great to protest, but how do we actually make our dreams or our desires a reality? And I think, you know, in a certain sense, I don't want to overrate the situation, and I'll come on to some of the problems, but I think in a way, what we have seen in Britain is that you can have situations where mass protest that is sustained can actually impact on the political scene quite deeply, and it seems to be a case in point. And so we are facing, and it's sometimes you have to pinch yourself when you think about this, but we are facing the possibility in the next few months of having a government in Britain that is led by someone who is, you know, going to try and confront this situation up to a point, at least, and is going to try and roll back on these wars, and will do, I believe, as one of his first acts, he will actually publicly support and recognise the Palestinian people and the Palestinian state, you know, and that's like incredibly big. So this is you know, clearly a kind of high stakes situation. Obviously, I do want to just point out some of the problems because that's part of strategizing, and I think the first thing is, you know, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour government Labour Party is not ahead in the polls. It's well behind in the polls. There's all sorts of reasons for that, which I won't go into, but you know, if there was an election, we're hoping that would turn the situation round. There may not even be an election in the next few months, but the likelihood is there will be. So I think we'll have a big struggle, and part of the reason we have a big struggle to get him elected is there has been a systematic, coordinated operation by the British establishment against him, which has involved the media, the courts, the generals, the civil service, the banking sector, the corporations, all sorts of dirty tricks and demonisation has been used to try and sabotage the project, including the media, which has played an absolutely, particularly the liberal media actually, has played an absolutely disgusting role in trying to undermine the Corbyn project. And interestingly, the things that they've tended to, these sort of forces of the establishment, have tended to focus on have been precisely his foreign policy positions. Because these things, in a way, the British establishment and the big corporations, they can, I don't want to overstate this, but they can live with a couple of % extra tax on the corporation bills because, we have a very, very low corporation tax in Britain, actually. They can live with even a few % on income tax and maybe a bit of an end to some of the austerity project. What they can't live with is any threat to the special relationship, is any threat to Britain's participation in NATO and support for foreign wars. These are red lines for the British establishment, given their colonial past and given the sort of whole project of what, and it's a bit like, in a pathetic and small way, it's a bit like what Trump is doing. There's a kind of project which is called Global Britain, which is a desperate attempt to cling on, and sad attempt to cling on to some sort of colonial role within the world by the British establishment. And they care about this stuff, they really do. And time after time, the things that Corbyn's attacked on is, not being someone who would be responsible when it comes to foreign policy, a supporter of national liberation struggles around the world, and the claim is a supporter of terrorism and so on, or terrorist organisations, all these kind of things. And of course, he's also an anti-Semite, which is an absolutely ludicrous claim, given that he's the politician who's struggled most against racism and the far right in his life, in the whole of the British Parliament. But these things, he's attacked for these things precisely because the British establishment cares about them. And so this is actually another reason why I think the anti-war movement in Britain is so important, because that we have to support the project, the political project. We have to be there to try and push back against the attacks on the right, the attacks by the right. And we also have to be aware that if we were to be in a situation where a Corbyn government got elected, the kind of attacks that we've seen on him up to now would be like a tea party compared to the operation that would be unleashed by the establishment against him if he actually got to number 10, got to Downing Street, got to government. And that's another reason why I think it's very important that the movement is organised in every town and city and community and university up and down the country, where we're in a situation where when he gets elected they'll move against him in all sorts of different ways. The movement needs to be able to come out in its tens and hundreds of thousands onto the streets to defend him, because that's the kind of level of crisis and level of political sort of volatility and instability, I think, would be created by the election of a government. And a final reason, just on this question, why I think we need to stay mobilised, is that although, and I think it's important that people are aware of this, because partly because it's important in itself, and partly because it no doubt has some resonances in other parts of the world, and perhaps particularly in the US, that we have in Britain, in the Labour Party now, an anti-war leader. We don't have an anti-war Labour Party. Some of the strongest efforts to remove him, to undermine him, to push him back on various different policy positions come from within the Labour Party itself, which has a terrible record historically on these questions. Has always been very, very pro-intervention, almost the whole of its time. Its leadership has been pro-nuclear, pro-NATO, and so on and so forth. So there's a struggle going on at that level as well, which again is something that I think the anti-war movement on the streets and organised independently from any political party, but obviously welcoming all political actors who want to be involved, can actually influence. And that's very much part of how we see the role that we're going to play. So that's just a really brief and thumbnail sketch. Sorry, I've just finished on of what I think is kind of, it's a quite stressful, but at the same time potentially hopeful situation. Just two things to end on in terms of the practical stuff that we're doing. One is to endorse the things Kristine has said about the NATO conference coming to London in December. You know, in this context in particular, it seems to me that this is very, very important to have in this scenario in Britain that is unfolding, to have a NATO conference. I think it's very, very important that we respond on a mass scale insofar as we can. We're having an international anti-war, anti-NATO conference on the 30th. I think Kristine said the 13th.
Yeah.
It's actually the 30th of November, 30. Please do come over to that because it will be very, very important. It will be quite high profile. And then a few days later, on December the 3rd, there's going to be a protest outside where the NATO conference is happening. Again, the more international participation there is in that, the better. So if you can, not just come yourselves to London from the 30th to the 3rd of December, but tell your friends, go back to your organisations, your communities and say, come on over to London. It is at this particular point an important place to be and to protest. So please do come to that. You're very, very welcome. And keep in touch about that. And just finally, obviously, I just want to endorse what some other people have said about the importance of the issue of the movement against the intervention in Iran at the moment, because it seems to me this is the sort of, certainly in Britain, this is the cutting edge of the argument against war. When you think about the importance of Iraq, the disasters that were caused by the war in Iraq, a war in Iran would have even worse consequences. I think there's no question about it. It would lead to regional war. It could possibly lead to a situation of confrontation between big powers. It's almost unimaginably bad. And we have to, I think, do the kind of operation we did against the Iraq war, but more so over Iran. And I think we have to kind of make sure we have international organisation, we have organisation nationally. We need to be able to bring out tens of thousands of people onto the streets to stop this happening. And in a way, if you want to answer the question, how best to popularise the movement against war, the imminence of a real war, of a particular war, concentrates minds and concentrates energies. And I think, you know, people can say what they like about the military, but when you talk to people about, look, what would happen if we followed Donald Trump and followed the rest of them into a war, another war in the Middle East, almost anyone you talk to is going to think, yeah, that's not such a good idea. And therefore, it seems to me this is a possibility to sort of take the anti-war movement onto, I mean, it's a frightening, don't get me wrong, it's terrifying and frightening, but it is a possibility to take the anti-war movement in various different places and internationally onto a different level. We've got a petition outside where we're kind of launching in Britain at the moment a Don't Attack Iran campaign on the widest possible scale. If you're interested in hearing about that, it's on the table outside there. Do sign up to that and we'll send you emails. But I think that's something we need to be doing everywhere. Anyway, thanks very much.
Thank you. Needless to say, very inspiring talk from all of our speakers. All of them have a few questions, and we have about 10 minutes or so to answer the questions. So everybody gets about 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll start with Dr. John.
Okay, so someone from California asks about how Bernie Sanders could support the F-35. Well, he just does. He's part of that establishment. He's absolutely has refused to meet with any opponents in 8 years. So we thought about going after him since he was vulnerable on the national stage, and we couldn't do it because it split the movement. He's good on so many issues that a lot of his supporters said, I won't go against him on this one issue and embarrass him and take a chance on him losing nationally. So that was that.
Yeah.
Yes, I have here 2 questions. How to end NATO?
Wait, use the mic. Hold on.
Can she use the
You
mic?
actually need a mic.
Oh, sorry.
There's a button on the bottom. Turn it on the bottom.
It's on.
There you go.
Oh. There are, I think, 3 questions. There are one to legal case and laws against NATO. There I cannot say a lot. I know there's international laws against nuclear weapons, IALANA. They are also supporting and a member of our network, but what actually on this level is ongoing, I'm not informed. I cannot do or I know everything. The next question was how to end NATO, and of course our demands are clear, and we stated in several appeals. We have to abolish NATO, and we have to ask our governments to get out of NATO, because this could be one way to overcome NATO. But I think there are also other possibilities which are not so strong and directly leave NATO. Also you can leave the military structures and for weaken the NATO, and of course you also have to act and build and create alternatives, and you have to strengthen process like the OSCE and things like this, because you must have an alternative, otherwise you will not get rid of NATO. And therefore we have also to take care to develop these things. And of course we also said this was the next question on the international meeting take place during the Action Week in Ramstein. And this international meeting said yes, the Germans should cancel this treaty which allows the United States to have military installation in Germany. And therefore we are working on this and also addressing this, and also the alternatives for these air bases and installations in regards to working places. We need this for civil and ecological use and not for military use.
It's the treaty. But it's for the treaty we have written about the treaty of the troops, US
So Joyce, this is a 3, yeah?
It should
Okay,
be sent
so,
to the government of Germany.
Yes, to the
It's prepared to give it on the government of Germany. But
So-
we have to do it. It's over here.
I've had 3 questions here. One is, are we about to see the death knell of the British Conservative Party at the hands of Boris Johnson? I think that's a definite possibility. The question it raises is, I mean, the Conservative Party is in total crisis anyway. It has less than 100,000 members, or around about 100,000 members, very much from the upper middle classes, male and very old actually. So yeah, they're in big trouble, and Boris won't help them. The question is what happens afterwards. You know, I mean, that's one of the questions, and you know, that partly, the whole thing depends partly on the extent to which the Corbyn's Labour Party can actually reflect the anger that is being felt in British society in a way that, you know, pulls people to the left, which he's had some success at doing, but I wouldn't say is a done deal. The second one is, I very much welcome your comments on Jeremy Corbyn, but a word of caution, we thought Tony Blair was a break with the past, and how wrong we were. Yeah, I thought Tony Blair was a break with the past, but in the other direction. So, you know, I don't think you can quite, you know, make the same, that analogy. But anyway, I mean, you're right, and then the question ends by saying, can Jeremy Corbyn deliver? I mean, that's definitely right to ask that question, because he's up against these massive forces. And to be honest with you, I think it's very, very important that we are completely blunt about this. The truth is that if Jeremy Corbyn gets elected and people just think that's the end of the story, he won't be able to deliver. If it's just a parliamentary operation, there is no way that the British establishment is going to allow him to push through the kind of policies he represents. That's just not going to happen. The only way it can happen is if that process of getting him elected is connected to and accompanied by a massive social mobilisation in the workplaces, in the communities, in the unions and so on. I mean, I just think that is a fact. And it's a fact that, unfortunately, you know, I'm not sure that the whole of the left, even in Britain, quite understands at the moment. And it's something I think we've got to talk about very, very seriously in the coming months. Finally, you said the Brexit crisis created the possibility of independent Scotland and Ireland. How much support for these potential possibilities exist in England? Good question. I don't know the answer. Definitely quite a lot, but no polling company in the UK is going to ask that question of anybody in England, because they don't even want that to be a debating point, you know. So you won't find a poll where people, at least I haven't seen one, where people in England are asked if they support an independent Scotland, because it's too sort of explosive a question to even ask, you know. But I mean, you know, I would support an independent Scotland. I would support a united Ireland. I'm not like completely off the demographic spectrum in Britain or the opinion spectrum in Britain. You know, I think these are positions that can actually be won with real campaigning and real clarity on the mainland. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, hopefully more. I'll try to answer a couple of questions quickly. So Odile asks, in South Sudan, women are asking you to be part of the negotiation, demanding 30% participation in government. We need to support them. That's true. Actually, the interim constitution for South Sudan says, I think that it's 25% or so of women have to be involved in politics. But that liberal democratic government that South Sudan set up is not something that came from Africa. It came from the leaders who had to please their donors and supporters in the West. And it'll be a while before South Sudan is ready for that. However, my experience there, meeting anybody who had an education, any young people, especially women who had education, is they're not going to go backwards. They will move forward with women's involvement. So that's a terrific thing. As far as playing the song, I don't have it instantly on the computer. I'd have to download it from Google Drive. Let me just ask a quick question. If after the next session, if somebody, how many people here would take 5 minutes out of their lunch to watch that video so I can set it up? Okay, I'll try to do that then by the end of the next session. Next question is very interesting. Regarding the nonviolent peace force, how does one deal with the urge for self-defense and preparation for self-defense? So this comes from our warlike thinking that we were all raised with, that violence is the final arbiter of conflict. And unless you're ready to use violence, you're not going to be as safe as if you do not. There's increasing evidence everywhere that other things besides physical force keep you safe. It's worth a session itself, and I think World Beyond War has had a session on the nonviolent peace force. We need to do it again. But I could go over with you the many, many things that people can do to try to prevent violence and mitigate violence that's coming at them without turning into what your enemy is. And finally, defense departments, research and development have been responsible for many, if not most, of labor-saving communications and wonderful technologies for the modern world. And I can remember during the space program, it was Tang and Velcro and all sorts of things. If the amount of money we spend in R&D on weapons research happens to have a side effect of making a lot of wonderful things for us, it just reflects human creativity. If we started up front to solve problems with that same money, believe me, you'd have a lot more improvements in all games.
Again, to the question to overcome NATO. I think it's not enough to get rid of NATO. We have to get rid of the logic of war and have to create alternative thinking and a logic of peace. And we have also to not only see NATO, we also have to see PESCO and the EU militarization. And we will not win if we get rid of NATO, but can't stop the EU militarizations. Therefore, we have to need a complete change of the logic of war and militarization to a logic of peace.
But step by step.
Completely.
Very good. We are out of time. Thank you very much. Our next session will start at 12, so please make sure to be on time. Thanks.